Inshallah, before we start, I'll just do a quick introduction on Dr. Mateen. Sheikh Dr. Mateen Khan was born and raised in the Philadelphia area. He completed his medical degree from Temple University Medical School and specialized in emergency medicine. As he began practicing as an emergency medicine physician, Sheikh Dr. Mateen simultaneously enrolled in the prestigious seminary program at Darul Uloom al Madaniya in Buffalo, where he spent 6 years intensively studying core disciplines of the traditional Islamic sciences, such as Arabic, tafsir, hadith, fiqh, and other related subjects. As the new branch of the seminary opened in Chatham, Ontario, by the name of Darul Uloom Canada, he relocated to it and completed his graduation there, gaining authorizations to teach the various subjects, most notably the 6 most authentic books of hadith. Currently, he resides in New Jersey, where he serves the Muslim community and practices medicine. Inshallah, Dr. Mateen will be speaking on the very relevant topic of coronavirus. He is also the author of the paper that Sheikh Hamza Maqbool was mentioning during his lecture on coronavirus and the coronavirus vaccine. So it is a very relevant and timely topic, inshallah. So, and Dr. Mateen, whenever you're ready, inshallah, you can begin.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيبنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد. So first, Jazakumullahu Khair for having me and having this platform. Inshallah, I've been kind of in and out. Unfortunately, I haven't had the time to listen to everything, but it seems to be very beneficial and timely. So because time is a factor, I'll just jump right into this. This talk, I'm going to discuss a little bit about coronavirus, but really my main focus is going to be not so much a discussion about the virus itself, but how we should be approaching this. What should our mindset be? What is the future of Muslims as it relates to diseases and medicine? So before we get on into all that, though, let's do a bit of a introduction. I'm going to go through 4 different topics. The first one is just about the virus. We'll do that very quickly. The second one is more of a general approach, more of a broader category on Islam. And how is it that we should be approaching this vaccine, this virus? And, this won't be the first time. It won't be the last time. It'll continue forward, decades, centuries moving forward, as long as we have time in this dunya. So we need to take some steps to change kind of our paradigm. I wanted to mention some things related to that. And then once we understand the Islamic paradigm related to medicine, then we can kind of reflect back on the current approach that we've been taking, what faults arise from it, what are the issues, and then from there we can move on to a discussion of the actual vaccines and any questions that people may have related to it. So let's first talk about COVID. As I think pretty much everyone in the world knows at this point, I don't think anyone's really been living in such an area where they've been, let's say, blessed to be spared of this virus and its news and its effects. Back in December of 2019, a year ago now, the World Health Organization was told about an outbreak in China, in Wuhan. And eventually they named it SARS-CoV-2 or SARS coronavirus 2, known as COVID-19, the 19 referring to 2019 when it was found. And not even a month later, early in January, the scientists in China had actually managed to sequence the entire RNA of this virus and open it up to the entire world to use. And so in March 11th of 2020, the World Health Organization realized that this pandemic was spreading quickly across the globe. And at this point, the entire world was notified about it. Countries all over the world got together, started working together to develop drugs and vaccines. At that time, most of you probably remember, and for those of us in medicine, myself included, especially on the front lines, we realized very quickly that this was a virus that was spreading rapidly. It had effects on the body, the entire body. that we didn't quite understand. We didn't know what the optimal supportive modalities for it would be. We didn't know what medications to use. We found ourselves without answers, overburdened, frustrated. Governments likewise were caught off guard. Some communities did not respond adequately. They blew it off. They didn't think it would be anything to worry about. They didn't think it would reach them. Others, I think, overly responded, maybe to a greater degree than they needed to. But again, fear was a motivating factor. The unknown was kind of shadowing over everything. And so the world at that point found itself with huge numbers of people falling ill, a very high death rate relative to other viruses that we currently deal with. And it wasn't until recently that we now have vaccines available and others on the horizon that are being tested. As of today, there are over 80 million worldwide cases, over 1.7 million deaths that have been attributed to it. In the US alone, we have 19 million cases, 340,000 deaths within our country and climbing. We're nowhere near the end of this. And by far, the United States is the highest in the world when it comes to cases and mortality. Despite our relative wealth, despite our advancement in science and medicine, we have really shown our weakness when it comes to this. It's affected people's health, their lives, their psychology, their finances, and even their deen. And I would say, especially among the Muslims, their deen has been affected enormously. I don't want to talk too much about that, but just very briefly, myself, other ulama, other imams across the country, we've been reflecting on the situation over the past year, the complete disconnect that's occurred between the masajid and the Muslim population. We haven't been able to go there as we'd like. The disconnect between scholars and the lay people. By not being able to meet in person. Sure, there's been an increase in the number of YouTube videos and online seminars like this one, which have helped, but there really is no substitute for suhbah. There's no substitute for actually sitting in front of people of knowledge, of people of piety, and gaining from their company. And we've suffered because of that. Just very quickly, this COVID-19, the coronavirus, is an mRNA vaccine. It primarily affects the lower respiratory tract, meaning the lungs. It binds to a receptor on the cells called an ACE2 receptor. And so just as a way of kind of seeing it, what I have on the left is the virus itself, just a drawing of it. So we see that within the virus, there's the actual RNA of the virus, which is packed within. And then on the outside, there's a membrane that contains multiple different proteins. The one that we'll really be concerned about is what's known as the spike protein, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, being shown on this particular drawing. And then as it interacts with the alveolar cell, being the lung cell, there's a receptor on it called the ACE2 receptor. In fact, this ACE2 receptor is found throughout the body in multiple different cells, which helps to explain why the viruses impacted so many different aspects of the body and caused so many different types of symptoms. So we see a human cell here at the top on the right side, and we see the virus on the bottom right. The spike protein on the virus itself interacts with the ACE receptor. That's how it binds, and through that binding is how it gains access into the cell itself. So through that mechanism, people start coughing. They have fevers and chills as the body recognizes that there's an infection. There's shortness of breath. There's difficulty breathing. You get muscle and body aches, sore throat, runny nose, loss of taste and smell, GI symptoms, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, abdominal pain, headache, fatigue, and really, throughout the entire body, we've been seeing effects, increased rates of strokes and heart attacks, blood clots in the lungs, blood clots throughout the body. And of course, we've been seeing death because of it. The graphic before that I went over is just an image of the confirmed cases per 100,000 people across the world. And we see that the majority of countries have been affected to a great degree. Even many of the Muslim countries, we see China relatively less, we see kind of Africa relatively less, but really besides them and a few other handful of countries, everyone's been dealing with this. So the next thing I want to talk about, which I think is one of the most important things that we need to come to terms with as Muslims in the modern world, especially Muslims as we deal with health and we deal with medicine in general, is this idea of an Islamic approach. And more specifically, I broke it down into two parts just so that we can understand it a bit better. One is an usuli and one is a furu'i. What I mean by usuli is the wider idea, the broader idea, the umbrella, the way that we see the world through our creed, our aqidah, the way that we interact through our worship, our ibadat, is what gives us purpose in life. It is the reason for our creation. وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that our very creation was for His ibadah. And then the idea of knowledge. And then after that, maybe a smaller way, a smaller kind of bubble to look at would be the furu'i, the branches. And these include the primary sources of knowledge, the Quran, the Hadith, the consensus of the Ummah, and then ijtihad, the secondary sources that we use as well, including tools like qawaid and masalih. This is more for the ulama. All of these things come from an Islamic paradigm. They come from the things that we are taught in our deen. And so let's speak about aqidah first. In fact, before that, what is medicine? How do Muslims view medicine? And by that, I mean specifically the vocation, the job of medicine, the field of medicine. Our prior scholars have defined it as a vocation, a job that integrates the art of that practice, the amal of that practice. It integrates that with science, with ilm. So it's integrating the amal with the ilm, the art of that particular field with its knowledge, in the service of preserving and restoring bodily health, sihha. So let me say that again. Medicine, from the perspective of our scholars, is to integrate that particular art of practice with its knowledge in the service of preserving and restoring bodily health, or sihha. This extends both to the public and to the private as well, and we'll talk about that inshallah. So what we learn from this is that health from the Islamic paradigm is the condition of the body when all of its functions follow a normal course, meaning the course that the body should have, the way it was designed to function ideally. Whereas disease is an abnormal condition of the human body, which causes harm to bodily functions. So the goal of medicine is to preserve the normal course of the body, and when that normal course is deviated, to bring the body back to it. But as all things in our lives, we approach it from the standpoint of aqidah first. There's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ narrated by our mother Aisha radiallahu anha. She said that whenever the Prophet ﷺ would visit a patient, he would make this dua: أذهب البأس رب الناس اشفيه أنت الشافي لا شفاء إلا شفاءك شفاء لا يغادر سقما. The words are beautiful. And in fact, the words are teaching us how we should view disease. The Prophet ﷺ, he started off by saying رب الناس. He called upon Allah through his sifat. He said, Ya Rabb. Who is the Rabb? The Rabb is the one who does tarbiyah. He is the one who nourishes. He is the one who sustains every aspect of us, every aspect of our being, the physical, the mental, the spiritual. It reminds us that everything that we see around us in nature, in the dunya, in ourselves, is a result of an intelligent design, an intelligent designer, involved in every aspect and every detail of it. Rabb al-Nas, meaning everything about me. There isn't an electron that moves there isn't a state that changes except that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one doing it. So it's a reminder, first and foremost, Rabb al-Nas. After that, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he calls upon Allah by one of his names, Ash-Shafi. Ash-Shafi is the one who heals. Allah is the source of healing. He's the true healer. And so it's our belief, our aqidah, one that our scholars, especially the mutakallimun, have rationally explained to us, that there isn't a single disease that afflicts a person, nor one that is removed, except that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the cause behind it, is the ultimate cause behind it. And so when we see this, when we see health, we see Allah. When we see disease, we see Allah. We are reminded of Him. And here the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is specifically calling upon Allah, Anta Shafi, that, oh Allah, you are the healer. La shifa'a illa shifa'uk. There is no cure besides yours. So when we see a patient as practitioners, or as lay people, when we see ourselves ill or we see others who are ill, we don't just see biology. We don't see sickness and illness, but rather we're reminded of something deeper than that. We're reminded of what is behind that, and that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The qudrah of Allah. The one that is Shafi, the one that we should be calling upon. And so I love this dua, because not only is it a call to Allah to heal us, but it is also a reminder to us about what we should be thinking and how we should be viewing the world. So the first thing I wanted to put in our mind when we approach medicine or health is that we remember our aqidah as it relates to it. The next thing is the linking of ibadah. Remember, as I said, ibadah is the body's function. It is the purpose of the body. So health is linked with ibadah. There was a Bedouin who came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or some of them, and they asked the Prophet, Ala natadawa? He said, O Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Ya Rasulullah, ala natadawa? That shouldn't we take medication? Should we try to heal? And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, Na'am ya ibadallah, tadawaw. He said, oh servants of Allah, seek treatment. Treat yourselves. فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ لَمْ يَضَعْ دَاءً إِلَّا وَضَعَ لَهُ شِفَاءً. That indeed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not placed a single disease except that He has given us a cure for it. Again here, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he's linking something. He's linking illness, he's linking health with ibadah. They asked him about treatment, and he said, Ya ibadallah. He said, oh servants of Allah, reminding them that your function is ibadah. Your function is worship. This is your servitude. This is why you're here. So on an individual level, we see that our deen, we see the example of our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that maintaining health, maintaining the normal function of the body is the method of ibadah. It is our gateway to ibadah. So we see that the prophetic path, it entailed personal hygiene, bathing, cleanliness after using the bathroom, brushing your teeth, your tongue, removing unwanted hair, trimming the nails, keeping your clothes clean, your personal spaces clean, your place where you make your ibadah clean. And immediately any Muslim realizes that there is an overlap between our physical health and our ibadah, our worship. All of these practices, in fact, if we do them with the intent of emulating the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they become acts of ibadah themselves, acts that become rewarding, pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I'm not even mentioning the aspects about wudu and ghusl, about making wudu and about taking a bath, that all of these directly fall into the realm of worship, because they're precursors to the prayer. They're precursors to recitation of Quran. And in fact, on the other hand, not just physical health, but the Prophet ﷺ has related us to mental health. These ritual actions that we do, like the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the tilawah of Quran, the prayer itself, all of these help our mental health. Then there's the primary benefit of all these, which is spiritual. These are the different aspects that make us up. Then there's the public aspect of it as well, that in our deen we find removal of filth from spaces, from public spaces. There's a prohibition of urinating and using the bathroom in places where people frequent, about contaminating water sources, being cautious about keeping animals away from humans so that their vectors are not intermingling, encouraging physical activity, swimming, archery, horse riding, and then having times for relaxation, having places for relaxation. There's the idea of quarantining when there's diseases. So all of these things that benefit on the individual level also benefit on the public level. There's a prohibition of intoxications and harmful substances that clearly have a public benefit to them, that without them, we can't have a productive, stable, viable community. So we see that in our deen, these aren't pointless rituals, but they benefit us. They don't benefit the creator, they benefit the creation. And through them, we see that there's a direct link between health and ibadah. And then the third aspect that I wanted to bring is the idea of knowledge and verification. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He said in the Quran, وَاللَّهُ أَخْرَجَكُم مِّن بُطُونِ أُمَّهَاتِكُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ شَيْئًا, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He extracted you from the wombs of your mothers in a state that you didn't know anything. وَجَعَلَ لَكُمُ السَّمْعَ وَالْأَبْصَارَ وَالْأَفْئِدَةَ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَشْكُرُونَ. And then He made for you hearing, vision, and an intellect so that you could be grateful. And in this ayah, we have an indication to three aspects of knowledge that our scholars have expounded upon tremendously. There are literally a century worth of scholarship on this topic within our deen, within the scholars of our deen, about as-sama', truthful reports, what you hear of reporting of information, ikhbar, of absar, of vision, meaning empirical data. What is it that you see? What is it that you measure? Information that is gleaned from those sources. And then af'idah, the aql, the intellect. That these are the primary sources. These are what make up epistemology. This is what the scholars of mantiq and kalam speak about. And so one of the names of Allah, since we engaged with His sifat earlier, is Al-Alim. Allah is knowledgeable. So our deen, like no other religion, places a tremendous importance on knowledge. Our scholars went deeply into it, about how do you know something is true? How do you know something is knowledge? How do you communicate that information? And so we have sciences like the sciences of hadith that speak about conveying knowledge, a verification of knowledge. And so medicine by its very nature is based upon these sources. We find that it's based upon empiricism, hiss, what we gain from our empiric interaction with the world, upon the aql, upon theory and studies and design and coming up with new ideas. This is a science that we have dealt with for a century, a millennia, and it needs to be studied by us. The verification of knowledge also. Many people take knowledge from sources that are weak, that have no way of verifying them, that have no substance to them. We would never accept a hadith that would come to us in that way, but we accept knowledge and we make life decisions based upon it routinely because we haven't studied the two, or we don't practice it properly. You know, one of the reasons I had studied Islam, I had studied medicine first. Went to med school, finished residency, all of that before I had a chance, before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave me the opportunity to sit with scholars and learn aspects of the deen. And so while I was in medicine, we learned this idea of evidence-based medicine. It is how we approached medicine. It is currently the best practice of medicine. And this is what we practiced in residency, and this is what we practice in medicine. And then when I found my transition into Islamic studies, I found in it, it became very easy, because I found that Islam also is evidence-based. You have your evidence from the Quran, from the Hadith, from the scholarly opinions. And so there is a direct correlation on how we approach that. I found it very easy to do. So if we keep all of this in mind, the importance of knowledge and this verification, then we see what's happened over the past year. That we now live in a time where viruses can just spread so quickly throughout the entire world, from country to country, community to community, from animal to human, farther than it's ever done before. And this is why we're in the predicament that we're in today. But at the same time, we've also noticed kind of an information ecosystem that has allowed misinformation and lies to spread faster than evidence. It's weakened our ability to respond to new threats. People bring up allegations and new ideas and baseless ideas, and we can't respond to them because they spread so rapidly. So in a similar way as the pandemic has spread, we've seen a pandemic of misinformation spread in that way as well. So the virus itself causes a certain amount of confusion, and then the misinformation also causes a great amount of confusion. So before I move on to the next topic, let me just summarize all this. The ayah that I wanted to put on this slide is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he said, كنتم خير أمة أخرجت للناس تأمرون بالمعروف وتنهون عن المنكر وتؤمنون بالله. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he said about us that you are the best nation produced for mankind. Why? تأمرون بالمعروف. You enjoin the good. وتنهون عن المنكر. And you forbid what is evil. وتؤمنون بالله. And you believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is a direct responsibility being placed upon us, that we have been given knowledge that has made us the best of people. And we will only be the best of people when we enjoin what is good, what our deen teaches us, what we have from Allah and His Messenger. And we forbid that which we have been taught to forbid. My experience has been, and I speak for myself foremost, that being in the West, growing up in a non-Muslim community, environment, country, that we blend in if we're not careful. We have been given knowledge that is tremendously beneficial to mankind, but we keep it to ourselves. We blend in and we take on the dominant paradigm of the culture and the community rather than influencing it with what we know to be better. Now, if we were to come back to our deen and approach our lives, our medicine, our health from the perspective of the things that I mentioned, then we will find a lot of benefits. So for example, in ethics related to health and medicine, our deen gives that to us. They're objective, they're from the Creator. They tell us what is good, what is right, what kind of conduct is appropriate based upon true knowledge. So in this respect, when we come to medical ethics or health or public health from the perspective of what our deen teaches us, then we will be able to take formal legal rulings from fiqh, blend them with virtuous ethics from adab, use them along with ilm and knowledge, so that we serve a clear purpose, a clear maqsad in pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and doing what is best for people. From our deen, from our principles, we will have guidance. This is a combination of knowledge, ethics, wisdom, purpose, beneficial actions, techniques, and occupations will come spontaneously with the desire to please Allah and to serve His creation. We'll know what we should be doing when it comes to health and medicine. Individuals will see it as their responsibility to take care of themselves and their health. As Sayyidina Ibrahim mentioned, وَإِذَا مَرِضْتُ فَهُوَ يَشْفِينَ, that when I am sick, it is He who heals me, meaning Allah is the one who heals me. So this is our responsibility. When we are sick, then look to Allah for shifa. It allows us to develop a framework, a direction for future empirical research, for approaching the world from the deen and benefiting it, rather than passively being on the receiving end of technology, meaning coming to technology, coming to medicine from a deen-oriented mind, rather than having it placed upon us. And then it'll be meaningful to ourselves, to our community, to our Creator. Whereas the current approach right now that we're kind of dealing with is the opposite of everything that I mentioned, or what comes out of the things that I mentioned. I really wish I had more time to expound upon this idea. There's a lot to speak about, and maybe some future talk we can discuss that. But when we don't come to our health from the perspective of our deen, then we find harms. Let me go through a bunch of them very quickly. The first is a loss of an usuli approach. And what I mean by that is the loss of an aqidah-based approach. We look to experts and scientists, and we find this in the public today, that they look to scientists and experts, Dr. Fauci and the FDA and the CDC, and doctors and vaccines as saviors, rather than asbab, rather than the means of shifa. So it's not that we shouldn't be looking to the experts, we should be, but the mindset should be that these are the asbab to healing. They aren't our saviors, but rather Allah is the one that we should be looking to. And when we lose that, then we lose purpose in medicine, in seeking health. It becomes about advancement rather than about servitude. There's a compromise furu'i approach as well. We capitulate to modern approaches. For example, the idea of using fetal cells, gelatin, porcine-derived ingredients, transplants, organ transplants, or all of these aspects that we're on the receiving end of it. This has been developed and is thrown upon the Muslim community, and now we have to decide, what do we do with it? Is it allowed? Is it not allowed? Rather than us being the ones who developed it. Because if we develop medicine and health from our perspective, then we wouldn't touch porcine ingredients when we know that alternatives exist. We wouldn't use human fetal cells because we would have found some other way of doing it. Rather than relying upon transplants, human organ transplants, we would have found other ways to do it. Rather than having a profit-driven approach, as we find in our modern day, then we would rather, instead of that, we would have an ibadah-based approach. We would approach it from the standpoint, as Allah has said about us, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ, that we would do it in a way that we ennoble the children of Adam, rather than in a way that we are using these things that are against that idea. There's a mechanistic approach rather than a dini approach. So what I mean by that is that we are looking to biology, applied biology, and technology. And when you do that without deen being your guidance, then it becomes naturalistic, reductionist, it becomes utilitarian, it becomes manipulative of the natural world. And so what we have instead today, rather than an Islamic model, or one that is guided by Islamic purpose, we have a European model whose roots are in the Renaissance. It is anti-church. It is pro-colonization, pro-colonial. It is an endeavor that came out of that. So it's a system that is tech-driven, naturalistic in its nature, rather than ethics-driven. So we find this rapid advancement of medicine that has no morality behind it. Ethics are lagging. Rather, ethics are kind of trying to catch up to it, almost on the fringes, trying to mop up the mess that is coming from ideas like cloning and transplants. And I'm not making a fiqhi ruling on any of these issues right now. I'm just talking about approach. So the Muslim world is lagging behind. It's failing to develop the treatments that would benefit people, that would benefit mankind. Even in the West, we find that there are a tremendous amount of Muslims in medicine, but they're not approaching it from the standpoint our deen teaches us, but rather they're adopting the current model. So what good is it to have a company that is founded by a Muslim? Or what good is it to have Muslim scientists and doctors who are throughout the system, but yet their approach is not one guided by Islam? Or they use technologies that are forbidden rather than finding those technologies that are not only permissible but encouraged. And as scholars, as ulama, we find ourselves on boards, we're writing fatwa, we're writing opinion papers, and really what we're doing is we're on the receiving end. Innovation is moving way ahead of us. And then we are left with the task of doing research, trying to figure out what it is, why it was done that way. And then after the fact, going through some, sometimes, to be very honest, some fiqhi gymnastics, some usuli gymnastics, to make it work after the fact. Or at the very worst, we're left with this idea of darura, that we haven't developed anything on our own. This is all we have, and this is the only treatment we have. So then we have to put the stamp of darura on it and allow it. Again, I'm not making a fiqhi stance here, but I'm speaking about the approach. This is not ideal. This is not deen driven. I have a map here of the world, and we see the development of the vaccine throughout the world. And we see a lack of Muslim countries involved. And as I mentioned, we could, maybe from our high horse here in the United States, we could look down upon the Muslim world. But the fact is, many of us Muslims, myself included, in medicine in the West, in these countries that are highlighted, and we really haven't changed the paradigm. We have what is best from Allah, but we really haven't done anything to make it better. So before I go on, let me just take a quick look at these questions. So, the bottom line here is what I'm advocating is that Muslim health practitioners, that we need to be at the forefront of advocating and participating in personal and public health. Not only because we have up-to-date knowledge, not because we have not only because we have evidence-based practices, but primarily because we have a philosophy and knowledge from the ghaib that drives us, that gives us knowledge. It benefits us spiritually by emulating the Prophet ﷺ. It brings us closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this requires knowledge. It means that all of us have to learn. And that will not happen until we place an importance, or we place as great an importance, if not more, on learning deen and the tarbiyah of our people and children through institutions like makatib, like madaris. That emphasis, the same as we do in colleges and universities right now. Until we do that, then we will be in the state that we are right now. As long as we push people to become doctors and push them into the health field, but we don't teach them the tarbiyah, the knowledge that comes from deen, we will always be behind the ball. So, what standard or compromise when FDA gave approval for emergency use of COVID-19 vaccine? Let me leave this, since these are all vaccine-related questions, let's talk about the vaccine first before we get to that. So very quickly, the first class of vaccines that have become available in the United States are mRNA vaccines. And there's two of them, one by Pfizer in conjunction with BioNTech, and the other by Moderna. And so these are mRNA vaccines. They're novel vaccines. We've never used these before in the past. Yeah, they've been in development for over 30 years, but they're new. And so essentially what they are, if we look at the graphic on the left, they are basically mRNA, so a type of genetic material that is surrounded by a lipid nanoparticle. And the lipid nanoparticle is made up of lipids and cholesterol. We'll look at the ingredients next. So these little particles that are man-made, they're synthesized. They come and they touch the cell, the human cell, when you get your vaccine, your injection. That finds its way into the cell, into the cytoplasm. The mRNA is released there. It finds a ribosome that translates it and creates a spike protein. And this spike protein is the same protein that is created, that is on the surface of the virus itself. That spike protein finds its way to the outside of the cell and is recognized by the immune system, our immune system. So then our immune system starts to make antibodies to it. And that's what's shown here on the right. So these are antibodies. And so the next time that the true virus finds its way into our body, we've already been primed to it. Our immune system has already seen that spike protein, which is on the outside of the virus. And so immediately it just latches onto it. And after latching onto it, it signals to the body, the rest of the immune system, that this is something foreign. It needs to be cleared out. And this is how the vaccines work, the two vaccines. There are other vaccines in development right now, like AstraZeneca. But for now, I'll leave those alone since they're not available just yet and probably won't be for a month or so, at least not in the United States. Looking at the ingredients very quickly of the two, of the Pfizer and Moderna, the very first thing is the mRNA both of which are, this is the genetic material. This is completely synthesized in a test tube. There's nothing animal derived about it. The next are the lipids that actually make up the outside of the nanoparticle, as we looked at on the graphic earlier. There are 4 ingredients in both of them. They vary slightly. The cholesterol in both of them can be animal or plant derived. Here we've been told by Pfizer, by Moderna, that they are not animal derived. And then after that are just basically different types of salts and amines that help to support that lipid nanoparticle while it's in solution. So for example, potassium chloride, potassium phosphate, sodium chloride, dibasic sodium phosphate dihydrate. These are all salts. So like sodium chloride is table salt. That is what we eat every single day. So these are just, there's nothing harmful about them. They're things that our body interacts with, and we take these in foods all the time. Then there's sucrose. Sucrose is just table sugar, what you put in your coffee and your chai. And here, tromethamine is an amine that is used in medicines commonly. In fact, most of us have probably at one point in our life have received an injection of a pain medication or something else that has had it in it. Then there's acetic acid, which is just vinegar, and then the same sucrose as well. So really not a complex vaccine. In fact, that's one of the beauties of the mRNA vaccine, is its simplicity and its capability of just being produced so quickly and rapidly. It's beautiful. In fact, it's amazing how this has come about. And I think once somebody sits down and goes through the ingredients, then you recognize that it's not all that complicated and really not something to fear. Myself and a small group have put together an article on the vaccines. And inshallah, as time goes on, we will add to it as the new vaccines come about. So if you want to know kind of like the Islamic approach to it and the breakdown of ingredients, you can find it at muslimmed.org. So let me take a chance right now and just go through some of these questions. If someone had COVID-19, how long is he protected from reinfection? Should he still get vaccinated? So this is a really good question. There's no clear answer, to be honest. We know that antibodies will linger around for maybe 4 to 6 months or so, kind of what I had shown on the graphic on the right side. There's likely a long-term immunity as well from B cells and T cells that continue much longer. We just don't know yet. We haven't had enough time to study. What standard or compromise when FDA gave approval for emergency use of COVID-19 vaccine? Inshallah, we'll talk about that. If we know the vaccine for COVID is effective and the vaccine is made of halal ingredients, would the vaccine be wajib upon Muslims, since it will protect ourselves and the people around us from sickness? So wajib is a very strong answer. Just because something will be protective doesn't necessarily mean that it becomes a religious obligation to use it. Could we say that it's mustahab, that it's beneficial, that it's recommended to do? Yeah, I think we can say that safely. That once we know that the harms are minimal and the benefits are much greater, that there is a benefit in the health of protection of the health of the believer as well as the community, then I think we can use the word mustahab for it, the term for it, although I wouldn't use wajib just yet. Any specific du'as, actions Muslim doctors should be doing for ourselves? Yeah, inshallah, we'll do that at the last slide. What do you say to perhaps the hundreds of young guys like me who are doing pre-medicine only because their parents? That is another talk, brother. Have there been any prior mRNA vaccines used prior to these COVID mRNA vaccines? No, there have not. These are the first ones that are coming out right now. Do we know whether SM-102 is animal-based or not, since this is a propriety to Moderna? Yes, we have spoken to Moderna directly, myself and other brothers, and we have been given assurances by them that it is not animal-based. So whoever, I'm here, if everyone can just kind of mute their mics. I'm hearing someone. Thank you. So as far as the vaccine, some quick considerations and concerns, since we're quickly running out of time. Actually, no, we still have a lot of time. I'm here in Eastern Standard Time. Good. So some considerations when it comes to the vaccine. Number one, let's talk about benefit, which I just kind of alluded to, or one of the questioners had alluded to it. That there is definitely a personal benefit that we should be looking at with this vaccine. We've seen the amount of harm that it can cause. Even if it doesn't kill you, it can make you sick, it takes you out of work, it infects other people. And so the vaccine has the potential to offer benefit when it comes to that. Then there's a communal benefit. Unfortunately, the Muslim community has been really hard hit by COVID. In fact, when comparing to other minorities, more so the Muslim minority, especially in the United Kingdom where they've got data for this, it's been shown very clearly that Muslims have had a higher toll when it comes to COVID, including more deaths. There's several reasons for this. Most likely that we have a lot of chronic disease in our community. Rates of diabetes, high blood pressure, cardiovascular disease are pretty high. And people with these risk factors do worse with COVID. On top of that, there's somewhat of a distrust of the medical community. There's, patient satisfaction isn't that high. Sometimes access to health services are not that great. Here in the United States, we don't have a great system for those people who don't have health insurance or don't have really good health insurance. And so that keeps a lot of minorities, including Muslims, away. And so we've seen harm within the Muslim community. Some concerns to talk about. So with the community, there's benefit in the vaccine in that Muslims will likely benefit more than other subgroups. As far as concerns go, there's a concern that we need more data. And that's understandable because everything is kind of new. And studies have just really kind of gone underway when it comes to the vaccine. We know that the vaccine will likely improve mortality. We know, but we don't know if it'll reduce transmission. There are a lot of subgroups that weren't included in the trials, or they were limited in number. So those people who had chronic diseases, yeah, they were included. People with like hepatitis, diabetes, and cancer. But people who were unstable, who had acute diseases or anything serious, they weren't in the data. So we don't know about them. We don't really know about long-term data yet. This is a novel vaccine. One benefit of this vaccine is that it doesn't have a live virus in it. So somebody who gets it cannot give COVID to another individual. It's impossible, simply impossible. mRNA vaccines don't interact with your genetic material, meaning they don't actually make it into where your DNA is. And so they won't interact with it. These vaccines, once they get into the body, they degrade rapidly. And so they don't really stick around for a long time. So yeah, there is some concern that it's a novel vaccine. But on the other hand, when we look at it from a theoretical perspective, and at least the data that we have right now, the risk seems to be pretty low. There's some concern about the speed of development. The approval for this vaccine has gone much faster than any other vaccine in the past. And that's really because of the situation that we find ourselves in. If government agencies and companies were to take the standard 2 years that we generally do, we would see a lot of people die. So they've enrolled over 70,000 people into the 2 studies between Pfizer and Moderna. And at this point, with the rollout in the United Kingdom and the United States, we are tens of thousands, if not close to 1 million over that number. So all of the people that were in the trials have been followed short term. They're going to be followed 2 years out as well. So what we have, at least on that data, is encouraging. People seem to be doing well. Yeah, there have been some allergic reactions, but they're really small in number, and they've all done well. So what I'm saying is that although the time hasn't been long, the number of people who have gotten the vaccine has been large. In fact, when you compare it to other vaccine rollouts, this is on a scale like we've never had before. So that's encouraging to know that so many people have gotten it and they've done very well. This is on a scale that even, forget vaccines, even medications haven't been rolled out on this scale. So we have a lot of data coming in because of that. There are other subgroups that were excluded, including pregnant people, but those are ongoing, and we have some data coming in about those as well. So bottom line, we can say that when it comes to side effects, when it comes to concerns about the speed of development, we know that in the short term, the side effects are minor. In the long term, we don't have that data yet, but theoretically, based upon everything that we know about a vaccine that we have created, we expect it to be minimal as well. So as I mentioned, there were some subgroups. There's children, pregnant people, groups that are at risk, including minors, including the elderly and sick, that we don't have data on, not a lot of data, at least not yet. So we'll be a little bit cautious when it comes to those people. But right now, it seems, at least for pregnancy, that the risks are less than the benefits. Although, as I mentioned, there's a caveat to that. We're going to continue studying that as time goes on. Just looking through the questions, give me 1 minute. Were people with diabetes, hypertension, or cardiovascular disease included in the trials? They were. That was not an exclusion criteria in the trials. What was excluded, who were excluded, were people who were seriously ill, people who were hospitalized, people who have those kind of issues. They were excluded. So we know it to be safe with them. Who are predisposed for allergic reaction of the vaccine? Yeah, so at this point, if you have any questions about the vaccine itself, feel free. If there's any concerns about COVID or some of the other medications that have come out, feel free to just ask the question. And inshallah, we can take this opportunity to kind of go through that, any concerns about it moving now and moving into the future. Who are predisposed for allergic reaction of vaccine? Right now, the recommendation from the CDC and other worldwide groups is anyone who's had a severe reaction to a vaccine in the past or have known reactions to ingredients of the vaccine currently. So if you have reactions, even anaphylactic reactions, severe reactions to other things, it's not a contraindication to get this particular vaccine. So for example, I have a shellfish allergy. That is not a contraindication for me to get the vaccine. There are people who have nut allergies that can be severe. That is not a contraindication. Egg allergies and so on, that is not a contraindication. Is it better to wait for a few months to be assured that there is no side effects rather than being first in line to take the vaccine? Well, the fact is, I don't know who's asking the question, but you are likely not first in line. First in line are people like myself who are frontline workers. First in line after that will be people who are elderly and sick in nursing homes. And then after that will be older individuals and the sick. So likely you won't be first in line. Likely if you're young and healthy and otherwise fine, by the time it comes to you, there will already have been millions of people that have already taken it. So I don't think that's just really a concern for most people. How is Regeneron? So Regeneron is an antibody that is given as an infusion to help people who are not hospitalized, but as an outpatient to prevent them from being hospitalized. I'll be very honest. It's not a cure. It's not a great medication. At best, it may prevent a number of people from having to be hospitalized. It is not known to be life-saving and so on, without getting into too much of a discussion on the medication. But the side effects, as we are aware, are minimal. I'm in 60s and never taken flu shot. Should I consider COVID vaccine? You know, I don't want to give any medical advice in detail on this, just because I'm not your doctor and I don't know all of your problems. But just as a general answer, if you are into your 60s or higher, and that places you at risk, especially once you go over the age of 65, even less than that still places you at risk as well, especially if you have high blood pressure, diabetes, and other medical issues, which most of us do by the time we reach our 60s. And so given that the vaccine seems to be little to no harm, and COVID has caused much harm, then I would consider it after talking to your doctor about it. How does it interact with our DNA? It does not interact with our DNA. So anyone who studied biology, especially cellular biology, you know that when an mRNA finds its way into the cytoplasm, it interacts with ribosomes and is broken down rather quickly. It doesn't find its way into the nucleus, and so it doesn't interact with your DNA at all. It doesn't become a part of your DNA. And so that is really not a concern. Can you make a fatwa to ban people? I wish I could. This question is, can you make a fatwa to ban People who send fake WhatsApp forward news on COVID vaccines, please. What if the frontline workers get negatively affected by the vaccine, then the world loses many of our healthcare providers? Is that being considered? It is being considered. In fact, you're not the first person to ask me this question, and I think it's a well thought out question. But keep in mind that there have been over 40,000 people, or about 40,000 people, before the vaccine was even approved by the FDA who had already received it. Many of them were frontline workers. And so it was only after they did well with it that it was then opened up to the frontline workers. So it's not that it's being trialed on them. It's already been trialed in a phase 3. It is now being pushed out to them. So I think at this point, the safety profile is decent and well enough. You mean the 5G chip in my brain is not real? So the 5G chip in your brain is not real. The 5G chip in your phone is real. So yeah, you're not being controlled by it. But for those people who are worried about the government tracking them, well, you've already allowed them. What should be the attitude towards the hukama that have espoused contrarian approaches, this coming from someone who follows their healthcare training and the fatwa, but is open to the natural approach? So, you know, every field has its experts. And every field has its approach as well. So the hukama have their approach, and the people of kind of, we can say, modern medicine have their approach. And the modern medicine approach is one based upon scientific empirical evidence. And based upon that, we draw our conclusions. And so I can say, at least based upon that, the conclusions seem to be fair, and they seem to be strong enough to recommend to the public. Now, as far as the hukama goes, you know, there's definitely benefit in what they do. I'm not one who discounts them by no means. And so if they, in the field of their expertise, let them speak about it. And the field of vaccines, vaccination, and these things, which is the expertise of modern medicine, let the people of modern medicine speak about it. What's your opinion about myth going around these vaccines might cause infertility? So this is an idea based on a protein called syncytin-1. The thought of it is that there are some amino acids that are in common with the vaccine itself. And so the vaccine, if the body becomes exposed to the vaccine, would it not theoretically then cause antibodies to the syncytin protein as well, which is found in the placenta, and lead to infertility? This is the thought. It doesn't really play out. The reason it doesn't play out is, number one, of several reasons, is that just because a couple amino acids are in common, it doesn't mean that the secondary, tertiary, or quaternary structure of a protein will match it as well. And that's really what matters. And then number two, if this logic were to hold, then that it would also mean that any female who has gotten COVID, because really, what is the virus other than the mRNA that encodes for the virus? What is the vaccine other than mRNA that encodes for a protein from the virus? What that means is, if the vaccine was going to cause infertility, then the virus should also have caused infertility. And despite the fact that we have had tens of millions of people across the world get this disease, we are not aware of any decrease in fertility rates. And, you know, I can go on, but let's leave it there. If people have COVID already and recovered, are they candidates for the vaccine too? Yes, they are. So as long as you've recovered and you're asymptomatic at this point, then you can receive the vaccine too. This is like somebody who gets a flu vaccine while having the flu, or maybe they don't know they have the flu and they get the vaccine. We know that to be safe. So the COVID vaccine is similar. You don't want to take it while you're symptomatic because your body's already fighting an infection. And so it's sort of in a weakened state, especially from an autoimmune perspective. So better to wait till your symptoms are gone. But after they're gone, there is no contraindication to getting the vaccine. How do you see the future of this disease with the new variants coming out and the vaccine being a short-term immunity window? Is this new flu going forward? So number one, we don't know if the vaccine is short-term immunity. We've only studied it short-term, so we know that there is short-term immunity. My suspicion and my expectation is that there will be long-term immunity as well. We just don't know that for sure, meaning we know it theoretically, but we don't really know it practically in studies yet. So what will be the future of the disease? Wallahu a'lam. This is where our du'as come into play, that we seek we look at the world from the perspective of the Shafi, from the Rabb, and we seek his protection, and whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala causes to happen, then we take that from him, and we see it as our qadr, and we take the steps that we have been given to seek our health. There are rumors out there about the vaccine that through this we can be tracked and followed by Muslim enemies, so we should avoid it our best. So that's just a hoax. There's no reason, no way to track. And the fact is that your WhatsApp, your Facebook, your cell phone itself is more than enough to track you. No conspiracy theories needed. Will a vaccine for kids come out? Since if the current vaccine is for people over a certain age, I think it's for individuals over 18. So the vaccine's only been studied in people over 18. And so because it's only been studied in them, it's only been approved for them. There are trials ongoing or planned that will study people less than 18, the same vaccine. And so once we've done enough of them and we know it to be safe, then I expect the FDA to approve it for that age group as well, but not right now. Are some things they say about the virus exaggerated? For example, the virus survives outside the host on clothing and boxes. So I wouldn't say that's exaggerated. The best we know, it does survive outside of the human body and can be transmitted outside of the human body. I think what's relatively unknown with certainty is how long it actually survives. And I say with certainty because there are numbers out there, but I wouldn't say that they're certain. With the different vaccines coming out with different manufacturers, is the result the same, or is there preference over one vaccine versus the other? Right now, the numbers are very similar. So for the Pfizer, Moderna, and even the AstraZeneca, we're looking at mid-90s to low 90s as the rate of preventing at least symptomatic illness. And so they seem to be about the same without giving preference to one or the other. I would give preference to the mRNA vaccines, Pfizer and Moderna over AstraZeneca, only because the AstraZeneca is problematic from an Islamic standpoint because it does use some ingredients or in the manufacturing process that are forbidden. Inshallah, as that comes closer to being released, we'll update our website with that, meaning the Muslim Med website. Where can we find local resources to take the vaccine? It is not readily available with a Google search. Well, right now it's not readily available, period. It's only being rolled out to people who are frontline workers. And so if you work for an institution, they will inform you. Right now it's not available to the public, so don't expect to find anywhere to get it. Assalamu alaikum. Wa alaikum salam. Are there any concerns regarding receiving the vaccine with people who are severely immunocompromised, who are highly at risk of death if they were to catch COVID? So yes, for people who are severely immunocompromised, this should be a discussion that you have with your physician. It'll be kind of case by case, depending on your situation, depending on the level of immunocompromisation. So I can't really answer that for you. What do you have to say to anti-vax people? It's the same thing I say to people who are, anti-ulama, or people who kind of blast who look down and blast the ulama. I say the same thing, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has asked us to ask the people of knowledge when we don't know a thing. And so I say to both groups that if you don't know a thing, then go and ask the people of knowledge, your own research, especially if you don't have an expertise in the area, should not supplant the expertise of those people who do. Since there is a limited number of vaccines available, is it preferable for younger, healthier people to skip their turn for the benefit of the community? I think that's best left to the government to decide, and it seems right now that the FDA does have a rollout plan for that. The CDC, has a rollout plan for that. So it's not a decision that you'll have to make. They will make it for you. How long these vaccines will protect us from COVID-19? Do they protect us lifelong? As I mentioned earlier, the correct answer is that we don't know with certainty. Likely they will protect us for months, if not years, as long as the virus doesn't mutate sufficiently that the vaccine no longer corresponds to its spike protein. Please throw some light on the video circulating about the vaccines that will introduce a chip to track. As I mentioned, those are complete hoaxes. I don't even think it's worth the limited time that we have to talk about them. Do you believe this vaccine will work? And that was a reason I went through the ingredients with you guys. is to show you that we know the ingredients very clearly. We know there is no chip. There is no chip that's going to even fit in an injection. Even if it fit into an injection, what's to power that chip? Where is the power source? How is it? I mean, if your cell phone can't get a reception outside of the room you're sitting in, how is a chip inside of your body going to get a reception? And so on and so on. I don't mean to sound frustrated with that argument, but I guess I am. Do you believe this vaccine will also work against the new variant strain found in the UK? As far as we know, yeah. It doesn't seem like the new variant strain spike protein has mutated sufficiently that it would actually not work. But to say that with certainty, we'll have to do some studies which have not been done yet. What is a Muslim website for a vaccine you just mentioned? That should be in the link that was sent. It's muslimmed.com. muslimmed.com. Actually, muslimmed.org. I'm sorry, muslimmed.org. O-R-G. Why would children need the vaccine if the severe cases, deaths are extremely low and the current vaccines are not proven to inhibit transmission? So yeah, the number of cases in children, or let's say the symptomatic cases in children, are much less compared to adults, and the mortality in children is extraordinarily low. But they can still serve as vectors. They can still serve as people who transmit the disease around. And so when we say that the vaccines have not been proven to inhibit transmission, that is true, but it also has not been proven to cause transmission either. It has not been proven one way or the other. So if you're going to take a stance on one side, you should also clarify the other side as well. That yes, it has not been proven to inhibit transmission, but it also has not been proven, meaning it may actually inhibit transmission. We just don't know yet. So right now, there is no push to vaccinate children unless they are at risk because of other diseases, but time will tell. If you already had the virus, do you still recommend the vaccine? You know, I think this is a personal decision. If you have sufficient concerns about the vaccine, and I've already mentioned that I personally don't think there are any sufficient concerns about the vaccine, but if you do, I respect that. And if you do, and you've already had the virus, presumably you've got antibodies, then your risk for reinfection is low, not unheard of, but low. And so, based upon a risk-benefit assessment, if you decide not to get the vaccine right now, you don't have to. Is it recommended? Yeah, the authorities are still recommending it. Is the virus man-made? Wallahu alam. I didn't make it. I can't tell you if someone else did or not. And at this point, it doesn't matter, right? The vaccine is there. It's causing havoc. Who made it? Where it came from at this point is sort of irrelevant. Was standard or compromise when the FDA gave approval for emergency use of COVID-19 vaccine? So the main, I wouldn't say that standards were compromised. The main thing that was left was the time that we generally study a vaccine. And that was because of the kind of urgent need of the time. But at the same time, generally the FDA does not mandate a large number of people get the vaccine. So for example, other vaccines were only trialed in a few thousand people before accepted by the FDA. So the FDA, because of the lack of time spent, have sort of made up for it by putting the sheer number of people that the vaccine was studied on in phase 3 trial as a way of making up for that. I believe most people misunderstand the word nanoparticle. Can you shed some light that it is lipids particle and not a chip? Yeah. So let me go back to that graphic that we had up here. These vaccine particles, when we talk about nanoparticles, we're talking about these. So essentially it's an mRNA in the middle, and then there are a membrane around it, which is made up of lipids. So it's called a lipid nanoparticle. Nano meaning very small, and particle meaning it's a particle. So that's all it refers to. Do we know any evidence regarding the long-term effects of mRNA vaccines on humans? No, we do not. We do not know that. And as I mentioned earlier, that we cannot say with certainty that there are no long-term effects, but what we can say is theoretically, knowing how this vaccine is made, knowing the way that it operates and works, that we're not expecting any long-term effects. Do you believe that since the vaccine came out, people will start up normal routines, or partial lockdown still possible with the variant still spreading? No, even if there wasn't a variant, a partial lockdown will continue until we get until the sheer numbers come down. So just because somebody's vaccinated, keep in mind it's 90 to 95% effective. So you may be that 5 to 10% that is not effective. Why would you gamble on that? And then there are many people in the community who still don't have, who will not be vaccinated, who are at risk. Why would you risk them? And then on top of that, as has been mentioned, we don't know for sure if the vaccine prevents transmission. And until we do, then we have to assume that it does cause transmission to be on the safe side. Have you received the vaccine? Yes, I have. How long the COVID positive person can take to get a negative test, even if asymptomatic? Once you're asymptomatic, you can have the test. Once you receive the vaccine, are you immune, and can you travel overseas that are still not rolled out the vaccine? So I think I already answered that question by saying that the vaccine itself doesn't mean you can do whatever you want to do. Will vaccine work on people who have tested positive for the virus? And will you be susceptible to get reinfected because of the new strain? Again, not much is known about the new strain, so a lot of it's just theoretical right now. I can't answer those questions with certainty. As it's being studied, then we'll find out more. Will the vaccine work on people who have tested positive for the virus? Yeah, it'll still work on them. If someone opts out from getting the vaccine, will they be at greater risk to get the disease? In the long term, will COVID be eliminated if everyone gets vaccinated? Will you be at greater risk to get the disease? I mean, yeah, if you're exposed to it. If you're exposed to the vaccine, then you're at a much greater risk to getting the disease. In the long term, the hope is that we at least reach herd immunity, which is that enough people get vaccinated that those people who are not vaccinated or cannot be vaccinated are protected just because there's no one around them to give them the disease. Okay, so that was a nice rapid fire question and answer session. If you have any other questions, feel free until we finish this up. In fact, there's only a couple of things that I wanted to mention in closing. So first is that the mindset of a believer, our mindset as believers, as the servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is that whatever happens to us, it comes from Allah. It is part of the taqdeer, it is part of the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so it is not something that worries us too much. We are not people who become overly anxious, concerned, or worried, although that is human for that to happen. But we find solace in knowing that nothing happens to us except that it happens by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the servant is pleased with whatever his master gives him. In fact, the very attention of the master to us by pleasure or affliction is an honor for the believer. And we find some comforting words in the Prophet ﷺ when he said, مَا يُصِيبُ الْمُسْلِمَ مِن نَصَبٍ وَلَا وَصَبٍ وَلَا هَمٍ وَلَا حُزْنٍ وَلَا أَذًى وَلَا غَمٍ حَتَّى الشَّوْكَةِ يُشَاكُهَا إِلَّا كَفَّرَ اللَّهُ بِهَا مِنْ خَطَايَا. No fatigue, no disease, sorrow, sadness, hurt or pain, distress befalls a Muslim, even if it were a prick that he receives from a thorn, except that Allah, He wipes away his sins because of it. We had a brother in our community recently in my hospital, was hospitalized for a long time with COVID on a breathing machine for a really extended period of time. Someone who clearly dedicated and had a love for the deen. Someone who loved the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and every, his friends, his family all knew his love for it. Someone who frequented the masajid regularly. All of the musallis knew him. He was in the hospital for quite a long time. And every time I had the opportunity to go and visit him, it was as if I could see his sins just washing away from him. As time went on, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala purified him. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala purified his family through their grief and concern for him. And eventually Allah took him as a shaheed. And so this is how we look at it. That on one hand, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has commanded us, tadawu, he said, seek health, seek cure, treat yourself. But on the other hand, we know that in our harms, in our difficulties, and even in our death, there is the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There is our yearning to meet Allah. And especially if one has the opportunity to die as a shaheed, then this is a mark of honor. This is a mark of happiness. In fact, I told one of the family members that although I am saddened by his loss, I am happy for him. I'm happy for him that he was able to go in such a way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala purified him, accepted his works, his actions, and took him as a shaheed at the end of the day. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept him, accept his family as well. So in the meantime, what is it that we should do? First, فَقُلْتُ اسْتَغْفِرُوا رَبَّكُمْ إِنَّهُ كَانَ غَفَّارًا. Allah reminds us that do istighfar of your Rabb. Seek his forgiveness, because إِنَّهُ كَانَ غَفَّارًا. He is one who loves to forgive. So we should be in these times in a state of istighfar. And as I mentioned earlier, it's not that we look at the vaccine and the doctors as a means for our health, but the fact is that we are looking primarily to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So as we live through these times, istaghfiru rabbakum. Seek the forgiveness of your Rabb. Also, remember the dua of Yunus alayhi salam when he was in the belly of the whale, and he would continuously recite La ilaha illa ant subhanaka inni kuntu min al-zalimin. La ilaha illa ant subhanak inni kuntu min al-zalimin. And be in the habit of reciting this, of La ilaha illa ant, Ya Allah, there is no ilah other than you, subhanak, glory be to you, inni kuntu min al-zalimin, I am from the oppressors. Meaning I am of those who have oppressed myself and perhaps oppressed other people as well. This is a dua that brings the mercy of Allah. It is a dua that in the way it took Yunus alayhi salam out of the darkness of the whale, of the belly, and into the light, inshallah, it will relieve us in the same way, take us out of the darkness of our times and into the light that we are looking forward to. My question is not regarding COVID, but how and when you should study. We'll do that later. Let me, inshallah, I'll leave us with one dua and a couple parting statements, but a couple questions here. I'll leave the personal question for another time. Inshallah, if you can find my contact through someone, feel free to contact me directly. Despite our rich past, we Muslims are no longer the leaders or trying to come forward in the field of medicine and innovation. Rather, we are satisfied as followers. What are the reasons and how can overcome it? Farhad, I don't know if you came late, but I spoke about this, that the very first thing that we need to do is we need to understand our deen from the aspect of aqeedah, from the aspect of ibadah. We need to engage with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through his sifat. We need to understand the tarbiyah that comes as a part of our deen. That has to come first. We need to put our medical professionals, we need to put our children through makatib, through strong madaris, so that they gain this proper tarbiyah. And then we can teach them what modern medicine, modern empirical ways are, so that they can take what they learned and then mold the future, mold the current system. Otherwise, we'll always be playing catch up. And I say that as a physician first, and I also say that as a student of Deen second, that I find myself as a physician having to live in a model that I know not to be ideal, because I know it doesn't come from our Deen. And as a student of Deen, I find myself having to give answers to questions as a way of catching up, having to make fatawa that are based upon durura and haja when they don't need to be. If we had a better system in place, one that was truly run by us, we wouldn't find ourselves in those situations. So let me finish, now that we're out of time, with the dua of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He used to make this dua frequently. He would say, Allahumma inni as'aluka as-sihha wal-'iffa wal-amanata wa husna al-khuluqi wal-rida bil-qadr. That, oh Allah, I ask you for health, for restraint, trustworthiness, good character, and content with the decree, meaning content with the qadr, khayrihi wa sharrihi, with the good and the bad of it. If we get into the habit of making this dua along with our istighfar, along with the dua of Yunus alayhi salam, then inshallah we will find health, we will find cure, we will find ease in these difficult times and moving forward. And so I encourage the doctors to keep this in mind as well when you take care of your patients. The dua that I mentioned earlier in the very beginning that the Prophet ﷺ made, أذهب البأس رب الناس اشفيه أنت الشافي لا شفاء لا شافي إلا شفاء لا شافي إلا أنت. And there's different variations of it. And then the istighfar that we should be doing constantly, reminding ourselves that even as physicians or practitioners, that we are really working for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We are working for this pleasure of Allah. Not that we have any abilities, not that we have any capability, but rather all of our tawfiq, it comes purely from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let me finish by saying two thoughts. Number one, speaking as a physician, the vaccine that we have, the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine, is the best studied treatment that we have, period, up until now, as relates to COVID. It has the least theoretical potential for harm against a known harm, which is the virus itself. So let me say that again. The vaccine is the best studied treatment with the least theoretical potential for harm against a known harm, which is the virus and the havoc that it's caused. I am not somebody who is on one extreme when it comes to the vaccine. I know that our shifa is from Allah alone. But I also, and so I give you this statement as something to think about, of balancing harm versus good and seeking the knowledge from people who have knowledge. Point number two, I make as a Muslim and a student of Deen, is that uncertainty is from the outlook of the servant. Any uncertainty that we feel and anxiety and frustration because of it, this is from our outlook of the world. It's from our view of the world. It is not from the outlook of our master, our creator, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Rabbul Alameen. From his outlook, there is no uncertainty. It's only certainty. So although we may not be aware of what the future is going to bring, not only is Allah aware of it, He is knowledgeable of it, and it is purely from His knowledge and His will that it arises. We expect only what is best from our Rabb. So take the recommendations and precautions by the experts in Deen and Dunya. We should place our trust in Allah completely, without hesitation, without doubt, complete yaqeen. And then after that, wear your masks, keep your distance when appropriate. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us shifa. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us, protect the deen, our deen, and the deen of our children and our progeny first and foremost. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect our health. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keep us all together in these trying times. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala join us together in Jannah Firdaus with our beloved Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Jazakallahu Khairun, Dr. Mateen. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect you and keep you healthy while you're on the front lines. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow you to be a means of cure and hope for many people around the globe, inshallah. Alhamdulillah, you answered a lot of our questions. I'm sure a lot of questions that everyone had. Inshallah, that's the AM session for today. And we will begin the PM session at 5 p.m. with Mufti Abrar's fourth part of finance. There's still time to register for the event. So if you have any friends or family members that you think may be interested, please do encourage them. Even if they miss the first couple of days, they can still access those recordings and catch up and take notes and review. So if you do have people that you know would be interested in registering, please let them know. Inshallah, it's kind of our responsibility now that we've heard the lecture. If any of our friends and family have questions on this, then we can do our best to answer these questions and also refer them to the link that Dr. Mateen had mentioned, muslimmed.org. Jazakallahu Khair once again, and inshallah we'll see everybody at 5 p.m. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.